We spend way too much of our lives working, to work and exist in a toxic work environment. But this actually impacts a lot of people. Why? Well, one of the reasons is people are highly adaptive, right? You start working at a place, everything's great. Next thing you know, things are changing. And one by one, the little things that used to be good about your working environment turn into negative things, and slowly, over time, it becomes toxic and you adapt. And maybe you don't even notice them. In today's video, I'm gonna give you 20 different signs that you're working in a toxic work environment. That way you can see them, make note of them, and evaluate, is it time for me to make a change? Let's go. Now, the first thing I want you to look for is just employee attitude. Are the people you work with cold? Are they distant? Is there a very clear lack of enthusiasm? You might say, well, Ben, that's normal. Well, not necessarily. I've worked in a lot of places over my day, places that were harder to work, places that were better to work. And generally speaking, the people who worked in good environments were happy, there was enthusiasm, there was connectivity. When you don't notice that, you might be working in a toxic environment. A clear and obvious sign that people adapt to but need to realize is not normal is a clear lack of respect for your time outside of working hours, right? You work during working hours, outside of that, you're not working. But when they start to insist that you need to do things outside of your working hours, that right there is a sign that you might be working in a toxic work environment. I remember I interviewed a candidate one day, and this candidate said to me, Ben, I had plans with my girlfriend for Valentine's Day. At 4:45, they said, no, we need you to work in this report. I had to cancel my plans, work all night, and then the following day, the meeting was canceled, and they didn't care. And that was normal to him because that was the culture he was existing within. That is not normal. If they have a blatant disrespect for your life, like outside of working hours, that right there is a big sign you're in a toxic work environment. Now, one of the things that most managers who are good managers do is they praise you in public and they provide that feedback that isn't so positive in private. If you notice that there is public shaming going on and public negative feedback, and it's kind of said for everyone to hear, and it's really insulting and it's demeaning, that right there is a big sign that you're working in a toxic environment. Lack of access to information is a pretty big sign that you might be working in a toxic environment. If you find that consistently information that could be shared with you and your peers is kept from you, and just there's a consistent lack of information, lack of the why as to why an organization is making the changes they are doing because they feel like you don't deserve the information as an employee, well, that right there, that could be a sign that you're working in a toxic environment. Have you ever noticed that there might be a priority based on like results and it's completely overriding well-being, right? So maybe there's a goal, maybe the employees are feeling burnt out, tired, and the manager doesn't care. They said, we need to get this done no matter the cost, right? If you notice consistent prioritization of getting goals and achieving goals over employee well-being, that right there, that could be a sign that you're existing in a toxic environment. And some of you are saying, well, Ben, it's a business, they have to hit their goals. Yeah, but there's also balance. And taking care of your people is critical, especially for long-term employee well-being. If they are just blatantly disregarding that and it's a pattern, it's consistent, you might be existing in a toxic work environment. One of the signs that you're existing in a toxic work environment that maybe you don't know and you don't notice, or maybe you don't link the two, is old antiquated technology. Why? Well, what you're seeing there is you're seeing a lack of investment in the tools that the people need to be successful. When you're working at a company and they are prioritizing, rolling out new tools and new things to help their employees do their job and be effective, it's because they care. They care about their employees, their ability to be successful. When you notice they are neglecting that and the tools over time become less and less beneficial to the employees, but they are still held to a very high standard, that right there is a sign that you might be existing in a toxic environment. One of the things I've always noticed about great environments that I've been in is that the leaders are visible and accessible. The chance to connect with them. They don't feel like some person who's sitting up in an ivory tower who you never will get to interact with. So when you notice that they are completely not visible at all, there's a lack of ability to connect with them, they are not accessible, that right there could be a sign you're in a toxic environment. Have you ever been working and there is just clear dysfunction, there's confusion, people aren't sure what they're supposed to be doing, how they're being measured, there's just a cloud of just confusion. That is a tough environment to be in. That's a tough environment to succeed in. And when that is happening, you have to wonder, what is management doing and what are they doing to make this better? If you notice that you're working and there is clear confusion over priorities, responsibilities, accountability, there's just widespread dysfunction and confusion, that's not normal. That's really not. You might have adapted to it, you might be used to it, but that right there is a sign that you're existing in a toxic environment. I love competition. Anybody who knows me will tell you that I am an incredibly competitive person. But there's a difference between healthy competition and unhealthy competition, right? Healthy competition, you want to win, but you don't want others to lose. You want your teammates to do well as well. That is healthy. But if you find that there's competition that is not healthy, where people are dragging each other down, it's becoming, venomous. That right there should not be the case. It doesn't need to be like that. You can compete and still have it be a good environment. But if the competition is superseding everything else and it is a primary driver and other people need to be pulled down in order for others to be celebrated, that right there could be a sign you're in a toxic environment. This one is clear. Favoritism. When you notice that there is obvious favoritism occurring in the workplace, that is toxic, especially when it is not linked to results. Now, there shouldn't be favoritism, period. But when someone is being favored for things outside of what they're producing, outside of what they bring to the team, to the organization, to the company, maybe it's based on personal relationships or something else, that is toxic. That right there is a clear sign. And for me, I find that very demotivating, because how can you get ahead if favor isn't given out based on performance, it's based out on other reasons? That right there is a sign you're just absolutely working in a toxic environment. Have you ever noticed that there's policies that are just absolutely fair and equal? Isn't that a good feeling? Well, the opposite is a sign that you're in a toxic work environment, right? If you notice that the policies are clearly uneven, unfair, unfairly distributed in terms of benefits, that right there is a sign that you're in a toxic environment. It is not uncommon to see a policy being doled out and clearly it is better for one group of people than the other, maybe one department better than the other, but it doesn't have to be like that. Policies, generally speaking, should be fair, they should be equitable. When they are not, that is a sign you are working in a toxic work environment. When people talk about what makes a good leader, there's a lot of things that come to mind. Maybe it's someone who advocates for you. Maybe it's someone who makes you feel emotionally safe. Maybe it's someone who has your best interest in mind. Maybe it's someone who helps you reach your goals. There are many criteria that make a leader good or not so good of a leader, but one of the things that is absolutely negative is they are unreachable. You have issues, you need their help, they are not able to help you. That right there, that's a sign of operating in a toxic work environment. I, as a leader, view one of my key responsibilities is to allow my people to hit their goals and make them as effective as possible. That's what I need to do. My job is to make you the best version of yourself. But that is impossible if you can't reach your leader. And if you can't reach your leader, that right there is a sign that you're working in a toxic work environment. One of the things that I always looked for when I was interviewing, and I haven't interviewed for a little bit, is growth. Have the employees on the team been promoted? Are they being developed? Are they growing? If you notice that in your organization, there is just a clear lack of opportunity to grow, develop, learn, all of those things, that right there, lack of investment, lack of growth, lack of opportunity, and almost like they're doing it intentionally, that is toxic. Maybe they don't want you to grow because they don't want you to leave for another organization. And while nobody wants key employees to leave for other organizations, you don't do it by making it impossible for them. You do it by making it so that they don't want to leave, by providing them with growth and opportunity. When you notice that your company is taking that ladder approach and they're not investing in their people so that they can't escape a terrible environment, yeah, that's toxic workplace 101. One of the things I've heard of is company policies that are targeted the time you spend outside of work. That is an overreach. That is toxic. For example, if they tell you, no, you're not allowed to have a side hustle, or no, outside of working hours, you're not allowed to be in have a second job or have a second business or whatever it is. It is one thing if it is infringing upon your performance in your current role. That, fair, understandable. But if you're doing a good job and it doesn't impact what you do when you're working for them, there is not a non-compete issue, but is purely, we don't want you doing that because that's going to give you something to focus on outside of your job. Well, that's ridiculous. You have an entire life outside of your job. You should be able to focus on other things. If that type of policy or any policy that restricts what you're doing outside of work when it doesn't completely conflict with your job, that right there, that's toxic work environment behavior. This one's obvious, gotta mention it, high employee turnover. If you notice that your company is not able to retain people and there's just a constant churn and burn over people in the position, there is something clearly wrong. Maybe it's pay inequity, maybe it's something about the culture, maybe it's just general toxic behavior. That right there is a huge sign that you're operating in a toxic work environment. Gossip. I think for humans, it's inevitable that there's some gossip, but I think there's a difference between friendly gossip or just, intriguing conversation and like gossip that is vitriol heavy, right? But if you notice there's constant gossip and it's like embedded in the culture and everybody's always talking and whispering and talking badly about people and leadership's doing it, that right there, toxic work environment 101. I remember being really proud in some of my early jobs about never missing work and always being there and having great attendance. And most of the time that was because I was motivated. I was happy. I wanted to show up for work. I wanted to get better. But if you exist in an environment where people are always sick, always calling in, never tons of people not showing up, usually that is a symptom. That is a symptom of working in an environment that is toxic. So if you notice there's a ton of absenteeism, you might go, I wonder why people are like that. Well, it could be because they're existing in a toxic work environment and that's just symptomatic. Have you ever noticed a clear breach of values, right? You have company values and there is a breach. And then a leader sees it and they look the other way. That right there, huge violation, huge issue, and definitely a sign you're working in a toxic work environment. Feedback is actually really important. Feedback is one of those things where a lot of employees, they cite it as a reason for leaving an organization. Because if you don't get feedback, you can't grow, you can't develop, you can't be better, and you feel uneasy in your seat. Am I doing okay? Do I have stability? If you're existing in an environment where you never get feedback and you ask for it and you're still denied feedback, that right there could be a sign that you're working in a toxic work environment. Companies who punish occasional failure are companies who will never grow. You need people to take chances. You need people to innovate, because if you don't innovate, as a company, you're going to die, right? You're going to fall apart. You're going to be left behind. So you need people feeling okay to take chances and knowing that with taking those chances, occasionally there will be failure, and that needs to be okay. But if you notice that in your organization, there is an intense fear of failure, where people are terrified of anything not going well because of the retribution of leadership, that right there is toxic environment. Again, people need to take chances. They need to try new things. And when you're trying new things, you're not always going to succeed, and that needs to be okay. If that's not the case, you might be working in a toxic work environment. So there you have it. Those are 20 signs. I want you to think about this, and I hope you are keeping a list. And if you notice, wow, I've got 6 of these things on my list, it might be time for you to evaluate, do I belong here? Do I want to stay here? And is staying here what's best for me? Good luck in your next interview. You got this.